Hey there. I kind of got the idea for this little mini vlog from a video by Wellington, Low Down Looks, which he did with his girlfriend Marissa. And he was talking about a trade he'd gotten, and she didn't know what a trade was. And it's kind of funny to me now that I think about it that we all know what a trade is. Why do we call these trades? You can probably guess, and my guess, I had a guess, and then I did a bunch of looking up online, and it's not as easy to get an answer as I thought, but eventually got the answer that I kind of expected. Um, and mostly they were talking about trade paperbacks as compared to mass market paperbacks. And people would just describe how the trade paperback, is often on higher quality paper and it's a larger size. Sometimes they might mention that a trade paperback will have a more sophisticated cover, perhaps. That's not always true, but and sometimes they would mention, and trade paperbacks are sometimes collections of comic books or graphic novels. But if you dig deeper, and it may be kind of obvious, uh, back way back when you mostly had hardback books, and then the poorer people or people who didn't want to spend as much money on their reading would buy pulp fiction. They would buy pulp magazines and that sort of thing. And then eventually the pulp magazines died and they were sold on newsstands, of course, and maybe in stores, grocery stores in general kinds of things like that. The pulp magazines died, and the paperback novel took over, and these are called mass market paperbacks because they're not particularly aimed at the bookstore market, which might be maybe originally considered a more high class market or a more what would be the word? A richer group of people who want to spend money on books. The mass market was the cheaper, fun read that replaced the pulp fiction, and you could buy it at the airport and at the grocery store and at the newsstand. Um, and books at the regular book trade stores that were part of the book trade, were returnable, and mass market paperbacks were like magazines. You would rip the cover off and mail the cover back to the distributor for 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 your returns to get your money back as a newsstand or a store selling them. And so eventually trade paperbacks came along as paperbacks of a higher quality that were closer to the trade hardbacks. Hardbacks sold in trades, but they probably didn't need to use the word trade very often until you had to distinguish two kinds of paperbacks. So the trade paperbacks were paperbacks for the more discerning reader, for the people really interested in books, sold in the book trade. So more expensive, nicer covers, uh, perhaps of a higher literary pedigree, perhaps. Um, because now you, of course, have science fiction, which used to be considered of a very low literary pedigree, and most of my books are science fiction, sold in trade paperbacks. But I presume that, like hardbacks, they don't rip the cover off if they don't sell it. They actually return it to the book company, who puts them back in their warehouse and tries to sell them again. Um, and one of the features of hardbacks is that there's a much higher what do you call it? A much higher profit margin on them than mass market paperbacks. So on a mass market paperback, you have to sell a lot more to make a good profit. So again, it's the mass market. You're expected to sell more. So a book publisher who publishes something in a trade paperback expects to sell less copies generally for more money, for a higher profit margin per copy. And that may also have to do with the returnability. You're going to lose a lot of money with these covers being ripped off. And I think in the past 20 or 30 years, the trade paperback became more and more part of fiction and nonfiction publishing, and often sort of replaced the hardback, or sometimes became a three-tier kind of thing. You came out in the hardback, and then you came out in the trade paperback, and then finally, for the people who weren't willing to pay money for all those things, you came out in the mass market. And then, but then they also have had the whole thing of, particularly with genre fiction, here's a fantasy novel. This novel, to my knowledge, came out directly in a mass market paperback. They figure that at least till this author's well known, no one is going to want to buy him in hardback, but maybe a lot of people will give it a try in paperback. And this author became a big bestseller, actually, and lives in Portland. Anyhow, which is where I live. And I used to be in a writer's group with him. And I had no idea he was going to become a bestseller. So an interesting thing I noticed while looking around at my novel trade paperbacks is they're pretty expensive. And I kind of stopped buying novels 5 or 6 years ago, so these aren't even the most recent prices, but like this one is, this one's $15.95, $16. No pictures, black and white. The paper's a little better than in this book, but it's not the highest quality paper in the world. And I have trade paperbacks that go up to $19.95 of books, just print books, and it doesn't seem necessarily that the prices may be even higher than that now, or they may have gone back down, because I don't know. But it seems like the prices, well, they tend to be maybe $14 and up. But it seems like the prices are maybe more based on how popular the author is, or how much they think that author's audience is willing to pay, than a kind of standardized pricing. Whereas in the in the mass market paperbacks, there seem to be more sort of standard pricing. Like most of them will be $7.99 now, or $8.99. At one point, when I was a kid, they were all 95 cents, I remember. And then I remember them going up to $1.25. So, and kind of, I guess in the same way, well, it used to be anyway, that comic books all kind of had a standard price. But the trade paperbacks, their prices can be all over the place. This one is $15, $14.99. This one is $20. This one is $15, $15, $20, black and white. Shoot, I don't have all the ones I I meant to have a bunch of the Image $9.99 ones, but there's a bunch of $9.99 Image ones. This one's $15. So it seems like with trade paperbacks, including in comic books, there's a wider range of prices that the publishers might set them at, depending on what they think the buyer will bear. So, for instance, the Underwater Welder is a black and white comic book, but they probably figure there's a certain subset of readers who are interested in Jeff Lemire who will be willing to pay a premium for this more obscure work by him. And it's a smaller publisher, top shelf, and they gave it kind of a fancy little cover. So I wasn't. I actually, when I this is a total side note, but when I bought it at 1995, I was. I didn't look at it, unfortunately, until I got home and saw it was black and white. And I bought it at a shop. I didn't get it with an online discount. So I was a little bit upset that I'd paid that much for a black and white one. But what are you going to do? But the interesting thing to me is, say you paid $15 for a beautifully printed color trade comic book. This may have cost more without all the color printing and everything. In the world of trade paperbacks, a lot of comic book trade paperbacks seem like a very good deal, given the fact that they're printed in color and often on nicer paper, and also they're generally quite a bit bigger than your average book trade paperback. So in a way, we're getting kind of a bargain. And when we buy trade paperbacks, often, I mean, there are now some Marvel trade paperbacks that go up as high as $30, although they're thicker ones. But in general, we seem to be doing quite well, in my mind, for what we get for a trade paperback. The hardbacks in fiction, at least, I haven't looked very closely at nonfiction. I think that hardbacks tend to run a bit higher in nonfiction. In fiction, hardbacks tend to run around $25 to $27. Oh, and this one actually is nonfiction, and it was $27. But hardbacks in comics actually seem similar to trades, trade paperbacks, because the hardbacks are trade too, I believe. So, like this one costs $35, and thought I had a whole pile of them here. This one is officially $50. Supposedly on more archival paper. It doesn't seem like nicer paper to me. It's not shiny at all, but maybe it will stand the test of time. But this shiny paper on the Avengers one feels like it will be less affected by sunlight and all of that. And then you got this one that costs $20. Now, granted, it's black and white. So, but I just thought that was interesting. There's kind of, I don't know why I find that, I don't know why I find that interesting. What's this one from? This is a Gil Kane. This is $40. And so it's very unstandardized. Like this Avengers, which is a bit bigger, cost a little bit less. And I'm not quite sure why. I think they're similar in length. I wouldn't say that Gil Kane is more popular than Neil Adams. So maybe they just thought the smaller number of Gil Kane purchasers out there would be less price sensitive. I think it's all a crapshoot. I think they just make up these prices. They just do their best and see what happens. Now, I've never actually been in book publishing. I have friends who've published books, but I'm not friends with people who are editors in book publishing. I did once take a publishing class about 5 years ago, and they definitely, from what I learned in that class, they're definitely thinking of what's the highest price we can charge. The obvious thing. So it's not just what does this cost us and what's a reasonable profit margin, but how far can we push this? So it seems like we're getting a very good deal with trade paperbacks in the comic book world for now. And perhaps Image Comics is even driving that better. I've noticed some other small publishers doing $9.99 trades also. That's usually the pattern is $9.99 for the first trade, and then it goes up to 15 or 16 bucks. But 15 or 16 bucks is a good price too. So anyway, I used Wellington and Marissa as my jumping off point because I like to talk about these kinds of things. I guess the floppy comic books would have at one point been like the mass market books because they would get their covers ripped off and sent back, and they were printed on the cheap paper, etc. But now that comic books are non-returnable by the people selling them and are on high quality paper, they're a different beast. They're kind of closer to trade paperbacks in a way. Okay, I think I have more. I want to do my amateur armchair economics of comic books analysis in another vlog. So you've got that to look forward to. Talk to you later.